My name is F.A. Phillips, and I'm 37 years old. For 15 years, I lived a life my own family considered pathetic. I drove a truck with over 200,000 miles on it, the paint peeling off the hood like old sunburn. I wore the same 3 flannel shirts on rotation, patched at the elbows, because I refused to spend money on anything that wasn't going back into the land. Every single dollar I earned, every bonus, every tax return, every dime I scraped together from odd jobs before I could afford to farm full-time, went into 80 stubborn acres of clay soil that everyone in my family swore was a mistake. My older sister, Renata, made sure everyone knew it too. At every holiday dinner, every birthday, every family gathering, she'd bring up poor Faye like it was her personal mission. She'd tell our parents I was drowning in debt, that I couldn't afford heat some winters, that I was too proud to ask for help. None of it was true, but she said it with such conviction, such practiced concern in her voice, that nobody ever questioned her. Why would they? Renata had the nice house, the nice car, the husband with the corporate job. I had dirt under my fingernails and a truck that backfired every time it started. My parents believed every word. To them, I was always the foolish one, the daughter who threw away a decent office job to go play farmer in the middle of nowhere. My father used to say it right to my face at Thanksgiving, shaking his head like I was a lost cause. Some people just don't learn, he'd mutter. And everyone would nod along, including Renata, who sat there knowing exactly how much I'd actually built, and said nothing. Because here's what none of them knew, that land wasn't just dirt. It sat on mineral rights nobody had bothered to survey properly in decades. And it bordered a stretch of highway that a logistics company had been quietly trying to expand into for 2 years. I didn't know any of this when I bought it. I bought it because it was cheap, because the soil tested well, and because something in me needed to build something entirely my own, something no one could take credit for or tell me I'd done wrong. I worked that farm alone for most of those 15 years. I woke before sunrise, fixed my own fences, taught myself to repair my own equipment because I couldn't afford to hire it out. Some nights I sat in my truck just staring at the fields, wondering if my family was right, if I really was throwing my life away chasing something foolish. But I never stopped. Something in me refused to. Then, 2 years ago, everything changed. A survey team came through the county, and word got out about what was sitting beneath my property and how badly that logistics company wanted the access it would give them. What started as a curious phone call turned into a bidding war I never expected. Lawyers, appraisers, men in suits who'd never touched soil in their lives, all suddenly very interested in my worthless farm. I sold it 8 months ago for $39 million. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents. Not Renata. Not a single soul outside the 3 lawyers who helped me close the deal, and my accountant, who nearly dropped his coffee when he saw the wire transfer confirmation. I sat in my truck outside the bank that day and cried, not because of the money, but because for the first time in my life, no one could call it luck, or say I hadn't earned it, or twist it into something it wasn't. I kept driving the same truck. I kept wearing the same flannel shirts. I didn't change a single thing about how I lived, because I wasn't ready yet. I was waiting. I didn't know exactly what for, but something told me the moment would come. And when it did, I wanted to be standing in my own truth, not theirs. 3 days after that money hit my account, my mother called me crying, begging me to come to a family dinner, no matter what. Her voice cracked in a way I'd never heard before. I remember standing in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, staring out at the last few acres I still owned near the house, my stomach twisting into something between dread and disbelief. I didn't know yet what had happened. I didn't know that Renata's carefully built lies were about to collapse in front of everyone. I didn't know that the family who'd called me the foolish one for 15 years was about to learn exactly who I really was, and exactly what she had done. I said yes to the dinner. I hung up the phone, sat down at my kitchen table, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself smile. What happened at that dinner changed everything. And it started the moment I walked through the front door. I drove out to my parents' house that evening with my stomach in knots. The porch light was on, the same yellow bulb that had been flickering for years because nobody ever bothered to change it. I remember thinking how strange it was that some things never changed, while everything else in my life had shifted so completely beneath me. When I walked in, the tension hit me before I'd even taken off my coat. My mother's eyes were red, like she'd been crying for hours. My father sat at the head of the table, jaw tight, staring at nothing. Renata sat across from her husband, Desmond, arms folded, refusing to meet my eyes. Something had already unfolded before I arrived, something that had cracked open the calm surface of our family. My mother finally broke the silence. She told me that earlier that week, Desmond had stumbled upon old financial records while helping Renata organize paperwork for their accountant. Buried inside were years of transactions, transfers Renata had made from a joint account she and my parents had set up years ago, supposedly to cover my emergency expenses. Money my parents believed had kept me afloat during hard years on the farm. Except I never once asked for a dime, and I certainly never received one. My father's voice trembled as he explained. For over a decade, Renata had been quietly siphoning money from that account under the guise of helping poor Faye. Money that never came anywhere near me. She'd poured it into renovations on her house, a boat Desmond had always boasted about buying with his bonus, vacations she flaunted online while telling our parents she was too broke to visit because she was helping cover my bills. She had built an entire narrative around my supposed failure to conceal her own spending. And it worked, because no one ever thought to simply ask me. I sat there, caught somewhere between vindication and heartbreak. 15 years of being the family disappointment. 15 years of my father shaking his head at me. 15 years of my mother's pitying glances, all resting on a lie my own sister had built brick by brick, because it suited her. My mother asked, her voice barely a whisper, if it was true, if I'd really been struggling all these years, the way Renata claimed. I looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel angry. I felt calm. I told her no. I told her I'd never asked Renata for a thing, never received a thing, and that every dollar I'd ever earned had gone straight into the farm she and my father once dismissed as a foolish mistake. Then I told them the rest. About the survey team. About the mineral rights nobody had bothered to check. About the logistics company so desperate for access to my land that they were willing to pay almost anything for it. I told them I'd sold the farm 8 months earlier. And then I gave them the number, $39 million. The silence that followed was the loudest I'd ever known. My father's face drained of color. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Renata simply sat there, mouth slightly parted, the blood leaving her cheeks as the weight of what she'd done settled over the room like smoke. My father spoke first, his voice cracking in a way I'd never heard. He apologized. He said he'd been wrong, that he should have asked me directly instead of trusting what he'd been told, that he'd let his own daughter be branded a failure for over a decade without ever checking if it was true. My mother wept harder, apologizing between sobs, saying she felt she'd failed me as a parent for not seeing through it sooner. Renata tried to speak, tried to explain, tried once more to twist the story, but this time, no one was listening. Desmond looked at her as though she were a stranger. My father finally turned to her and asked the only question that mattered, why? Why would she build her entire image, her entire life, on tearing mine down? She had no answer that made sense. She mumbled something about pressure, about needing to appear successful, about it being easier to blame me than admit her own financial ruin. But excuses don't rebuild 15 years of stolen dignity, and everyone at that table knew it. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I simply sat there and let the truth do what it needed to do. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like the daughter who had finally been seen, not the one who'd been dismissed. Walking out to my truck that night, the same worn-down truck that had carried me through every hard season, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because of the money now sitting in my account, but because the lie that had defined me for so long had finally collapsed beneath its own weight. If this story moved you, if you believe hard work and quiet patience eventually get their moment, hit that subscribe button right